Obajo, wama tik dijon cause, megazadodam, wasaksing donjaba, anishnabe endao. Chumigwach mushomus, nagabi wase, aje en nungum. Chumigwach ndakit nungum, gijagat, wemanajamano, ganawab mag, nagiwa, jabamadas, meanwa, wemanajagano nang. Migwach gaish kikimekwe, ogamijayang, matsuwen. Ogamijayang, mijam, ogamijayang, nebe, ogamijayang, wisayak, meanwa, ogamijayang, nisawen. Sama, nabagadana, wabanang, jaunang, nagabianang, meanwa, giwedanang, naramoshin jamoshka gabuyan, meanwa, jazongdayan. Kenagego gamijayang osa bamadzuwin, widokoshnang. Janamayang koyak jabamoseyang, chumigwach gijamanado. Gamijayang geget sanan, migwach gebenojinan, webana jamaji quad. Homigwach, and that prayer was just a little prayer honoring creation. Some of the things I'll be talking about is the love we do have for creation is something that, we've been given so freely from Creator to live a good life here, and honoring creation in a way that reminds us and him and her that, we will always remember the good things in life and how we are sustained in life here. I'm going to offer a song. This was given to me by my good friend Dan Garcia. In turn, was given to him by one of our local elders, the Honorable H. Neil Manag, and it's the Eagle song, and I'm Eagle Clan, and in that song, we do our songs for a reason. They're just not sung out of singing a song. They're done. Again, like that prayer in this song really talks about honoring life. And in this song, it's used in the pipe and eagle teaching. And it talks about how that eagle at one point almost like gave his life for us because he wanted us to have a good life here. So we honor that eagle in a way that helps us remember to always keep those ways, keep those ways in a good way. And the song itself, it talks about Megaza Giwab Ma, which means I see the eagle. Megaza Ginondwa, I hear the eagle. And Megaza Gitkwana is I carry the eagle. Way So I want to start with the some of the things that I've learned over the course of my time walking this way of life, and all these songs and teachings and ceremonies that I've learned have been passed on to me. And when I acknowledge those men who offered that song to me, that's what we do. These songs, these ceremonies, they're all passed on. I don't get them from a book. I don't get them from Google. And these things have been passed on. And I want to acknowledge my daughter and other women who have helped me. Oshkideyweywin Binnoojiiyag. Some of the women that have offered their teachings, because as a man, I'm to learn my teachings, but I'm also to learn women's teachings too. And that's about the balance, the balance in our lives, which really leads into how we live a good life. In one of the teachings, it talks about how that fire, that center fire, burns in a way that it doesn't rage or it doesn't flicker. So when we have those women and men's teachings together, that brings balance, which is really when we talk about unconditional love, that's what we get from the women for us to feel our own love for ourselves. So again, that nurturing, that's something that we as men, we have to work on. We have to work on a regular basis because of how we are created, and I believe in part of the creation story, what they talk about is that everybody has a role and responsibility. And as men, we have our roles, and women have their roles. So it kind of goes back to that unconditional love that we can give to each other, I guess. And in that song itself, it talks about that eagle, how that eagle, did things for us that sometimes we forget. People talk about the eagle and people honor the eagle. There's a lot of different people who honor that eagle in a way that they have different ways of honoring it. But for us, that eagle was the one that partitioned for us when things here on creation got a little hairy. We've had our teachings from the beginning of time immemorial, but as we know, people in general living together, there's going to be it's not all rosy. It's not all rosy at those times. And so in that eagle teaching, like the song itself, it talks about seeing the eagle, hearing the eagle, and carrying the eagle. In the teaching, that eagle came and supported us because of the chaos that was happening here on creation. There was a lot of fighting, there was a lot of unkindness, there was a lot of things happening here. The children were being left alone and to fend for themselves. And that is not why we were created here. We were created out of love. And what that means to me is that anything that I experience in life, I have to know that that is not who I am. I have to know that I was created in a way that, with all those 7 grandfather teachings in my mind, I guess, or in my heart, and to follow those 7 grandfather teachings, we have to follow it in a way that we don't just talk about it, we have to actually do those things, because they really don't mean a whole lot if we're just voicing these and then say I'm a kind person and then I go home and kick the dog. Well, that tells you right there that the kindness isn't embedded in here. And that comes with a lot of, when we look at our history of Indigenous people, like for 500 years, we've been colonized. In 1492, when things started to change here on Turtle Island, like this is only my story as Ojibwe people. In 1492, when the other race came, things totally took a different route. But when I think about that history, there are prophecies that talk about that time in life when they say the other face will come, and it will come either with greed or it will come with open arms. I remember listening to Jim Dumont, who was one of my mentors for many years, and he talked about that. He talked about how that time for us would happen, and it's like a duality in life. So we could take either road. We could take that road of greed, or we could take that road of kindness and love. So, personally, I think about that. These teachings. I think that in order to love myself, I have to be kind to myself. But what does that mean? What does that actually mean? Like I have to incorporate all those 7 teachings just for that one teaching. We can't say we're kind and without having courage to say kind. We can't say kindness without having humility. And humility is really a good teaching, because humility doesn't mean we are taking responsibility because we have to. We're taking responsibility because that's who we are. So those grandfather teachings really were guiding principles when we talk about the unconditional love. I know, even when I introduced myself with those clans, for the longest time I talked about my father, Eagle Clan. As Ojibwe, we follow our Ojibwe clan our father through the Ojibwe clan. For the longest time, I didn't mention my mom, who was Hoof Clan, and so, but now I do. Now when I remember, I try to acknowledge my mother too. And when I think about, there are times, like I've been on this road for, a good amount of years, but there's times, life happens, and we begin to feel a little, whatever, that fire that is supposed to burn evenly, sometimes it's flickering. And when that's happening, I'm pretty aware. I know that there's something going on in my life. And just recently, there was things that happened in my life, and I could tell that fire was flickering. But one of the teachings I have was shared with me by one of our community members, was that when that fire is flickering, or when our life we are down a little bit, we think about our clans. We think about, if I think about the Eagle Clan who petitioned for us to take those my prayers to Creator every time I prayed, that's very empowering for me. Or if I think about the Hoof Clan, when you think about the moose and how they barrel through anything when they're either migrating, especially when they're migrating to go to their mating grounds, and they're not going to stop. So when I think about my mother and how she brought us up in a way that, it did make me stronger. And maybe, there was things in my life that, kind of tested that love for my mother and her father because of the issues from colonization. I go back to those teachings. I go back to those clan teachings where both those clans are very strong. They're strong for a reason, and that's to keep me humble. Because when I'm not humble, again, that's when that fire might rage. And when my fire is raging, probably my grandchildren won't come around me. my partner, or my kids, even my friends, when that fire is raging. So it's really important that we try to keep that fire burning in a way that is balanced. It comes from balance. And those 7 grandfather teachings are guiding principles. The nurturing of self really is our responsibility. It's people can help us, but at the end of the day, that is our responsibility. And in our creation story, when we were created, Creator took so much time when He molded us. He molded us in a way that, in His mind, was perfect. But that's not to say we're perfect, but that's how Creator created us. And when I talk about Creator, I say He, but if it was a woman, she would say she. And that's the way I've been taught. So like I said, if it was my daughter talking about it, she would probably say she. So just to make that clear, but I always refer to as him. So when Creator created us here, He molded us in a way that we would be perfect. So when it comes to love and nurturing, going back to those stories, going back to those teachings, it really grounds us. We think about that. We think about that in a way. Why am I feeling this way when I've been given everything in my life here to live a good life? And a lot of that comes from the land. When we think about the land and we think about the animals, we think about the water, we think about the food. Like everything I said in that prayer this morning talked about that. It talked about everything in creation that we've been given to live a good life here. Back in the day when we did live off the land, we did live that way of life. Everybody got along, and again, there were things that happened with us, but for the most part, we got along because we understood that without each other, the community would suffer. We talk about clan systems, the Ojibwe clan systems. There's 7 clans there, and each one of those clans had a role and responsibility. If the Bear clan decided to say, well, no, I'm not going to get along, take his medicine and leave, the community suffered. The Wabjishi, if the Wabjishi said, the Martin clan said, well, I'm not going to protect the community anymore, the community suffered. Or the Eagle, the Megaza, if he said, well, I'm not going to watch over the people anymore, then the community suffered. So those roles and responsibilities of the clan system were very important. And they were kept in a way that, when, like I said, when we honored with prayer and ceremony and song, that's what tells Creator we're still following a way of life. Even when we put down tobacco, in the mornings we face the east and we talk to creation and we ask Creator to help us today. And very simple prayer. When I first started on this journey, I had very little knowledge of my culture. Even though I grew up on the reserve, the impact of colonization was very prevalent, and so those teachings that my mother and father had, and which I knew they had, because I would see them using the medicines. I would see them talking to the medicines. But as we went along, they didn't share those things with us because the influence of the churches, they said that, we wouldn't need these things because we're going across the river, which meant we were going to school in town. So when they couldn't do that, I feel they couldn't do that, that impacted their way of being that good father and good mother. And of course, that led to other things in my life too, which weren't the greatest. They weren't the greatest time in our lives. I had 3 sisters, and I was the only boy. And when those things happened in our lives, you know, I truly wish I would have had these teachings, because I know things would be different. I'm working with youth on a regular basis, and some of them are, they age from maybe even 4 to 18 or 21. So I work with a variety of youth, but when I'm sitting with those youth, I really go back to my time when I was young. Struggles, I guess, to understand, just weren't there. They weren't there to understand who I was, why I was here, where I was going, and what was my purpose. I just didn't have that understanding. So as I walked through life, I kind of walked in a way where, my name, Wamatik, means leaning tree. So I kind of walked that way in life. And, I don't mind sharing this, but I've been in recovery in this past November for 24 years. And when I received my name, like I said, those names mean something to us. They are about our identity. And when I received that name from my cousin, I really felt that, that was a part of the empowerment, because I began to understand who I was and why I was here and where I was going. When I struggled in life, I could see why that name was good for me. It was Wamatik, leaning tree. And when I walk in the bush today and I see a lot of leaning trees, it kind of tells me that I should probably look at my life and some of the decisions I'm making, or maybe there's a little chaos here or there, because the one thing I know about healing is prevention. Is that when things, if you can grasp something before it becomes a bigger issue, that brings you back in balance. But if you don't, I know from my own experiences in life, it will, it will just go down those other roads where sometimes, you stay there for a while. Like I said, in my addiction, I was there for some time, and it impacted a lot of people. It impacted people in my lives, my family, my friends, my community, so that love and nurturing that is within us, that went down that other road. Like, I could just say that I wasn't living that life. And it wasn't because of my own fault. It wasn't my parents' fault. It wasn't my grandparents' fault. It wasn't anybody's fault. Because now I know today, the impact of colonization has really taken a lot of things away from us. In that prayer I shared this morning, I'm not fluent. I'm not fluent in the language, but I do try to speak my language. And the more we try to speak our language, that spirit feels good. The spirit is always, the spirit is pure. That's what I know. When we hear those teachings of how the spirit comes here as a pure, just there's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with it. There's something that happened to it. So I talked a little bit about, creation and that story. And when I'm talking about these things, and when I'm working with individuals, it's particularly young people, those young individuals. We have camps here at Dnaagdawenmag Binnoojiiyag, and we bring out the youth and bring them on the land to do camps. And there was one day that, there's a lot of times when they come, and I understand, because I was in care. I understand where they're coming from, that there's sometimes there's chaos in our camps, and so I relate that to myself growing up, being in care. And when those feelings of chaos, those feelings of hurt, I guess you could say, because you don't really know where you are, you don't know where you're going, and that's how it was back in the day. That's why they called it the 60 scoop, is they just came and they took you, they took us. And so when I'm working with individuals, the little guys, I asked them a question. I asked them, I say, how do you feel at night, when you go to bed? Because my experience was, I could go through the day, I could go to school, I could, my sister and I were kept together in care. We got separated between my older sister and my younger sister. So we were separated, and it was my middle sister her and I stayed together. So during the day, we'd come home and we'd have to go into the garden and have to do the garden work and the chores around the house. Or I used to be the one we snared a lot of rabbits. And oh man, I never ate so much rabbits. We had rabbit stew, we had rabbit pie, we had rabbit, but that was my role, was to go and collect those rabbits in the winter. So when her and I would share, those times together, I felt good about that. But it was nighttime when all the things that I was thinking about were really impacting me. Because I would think about, even like nobody told us why we were there. Like nobody said to about my mom that, your mom's just a little unwell right now and she's struggling, and nobody said that, so those were the times at nighttime when I really thought a lot about those questions that couldn't be answered. I mean, I was too young to answer those questions myself. So as I went through life, those questions, until I found sobriety and the culture, those questions went unanswered for a long time, about my mom and about my dad. And it brought a lot of ill feelings. And when we talk about isolation, I thought about, if I was by myself, I wouldn't impact anybody. So I didn't talk about these things. I didn't talk about how I was feeling. And of course, when we think about addictions and alcoholism, a lot of those times, that's where those things come from. You're not able to talk about things, and so you internalize them. And it really puts you out of balance, like I was talking about earlier, that balance. So when I'm sitting with those youth in those in our camps, or even when I'm working with youth, I always kind of bring it in a roundabout way, ask them, how was your night? And 9 times out of 10, they'll say, well, I have bad dreams. I'm dealing with this, or I'm feeling like this, and they're able to say that. I felt scared, but I wasn't able to say that to anybody because nobody asked me. So that's why I asked those youth to say, how did you sleep last night? And that one time we did a camp, I came in and I made a little bundle for them. I made a little, I bought some little wee mega shells, some smudging shells. I put a little bit of tobacco, a little bit of sage, a little bit of cedar, all those 4 medicines, a little bit of ween gush, sweet grass. I put them in that bundle and I talked about it. I talked about it to them that say, this is what you can do for yourself at night. I said, you might not be able to use matches. I says, but if you have those medicines with you, I said, you can go into your mind and just tell yourself you're smudging with these things. Because in my teachings, those medicines are very strong. And if you talk to those medicines, they will help you. Like the cedar medicine, that Gishkan duck, that is about healing. You think about that northern door, that's where that medicine comes from. And that doorway is really, that's where that polar bear sits. And that polar bear is the one who will take all those hurts and take them to the far north and bury them. Like that buffalo who sits in the west, the sage, he's the one that stood up for us until we picked up our teachings. In our one of our sweat lodge teachings, it talks about how he stood in the western door. And he stood on one leg for a long time until we started to do things around the teaching and start to pick them up. And today they say that now we're beginning to see his three legs because of what we're all doing here on Turtle Island. We're picking up those ways, we're picking up the language, we're picking up the ceremonies, and in that southern door, that eagle, that Megazah, that, as I talked earlier about how strong that Megazah is, but he's around relationships, the Megazah. It talks about relationships in those teachings. Then, of course, in that eastern door, the robin sits. That robin sits there, and that's about renewal. And we talk about that when we put our tobacco down. If we see a robin when we're putting our tobacco down in the spring, that can really lift somebody's spirits when they know these teachings. And I just noticed I started in the northern door and I went to the left. So there might be listen to a lot of Mohawk teachings, and so they go to the left around the fire and we go to the right. So there's a little joke there. We'll say, well, we do the right way and they do the wrong way. And so I kind of honored them, and I started from that doorway, from that northern doorway. But those teachings, like if I would have had those, I feel, as a young boy, which is what I do with our youth, I feel that spirit hears that, because the spirit comes here, like I was saying earlier, comes here pure. But if we can help those little, even those young lives, there hasn't been too much things gone on in their lives, but then again, there's a lot, because trauma is very impactful, especially to that little spirit. And then the layers start to go on that young mind. But those teachings, I feel, help empower that spirit, because we talk about resilience, of the people, and the children are very resilient. But I think the more we talk to them about these teachings, the more we tell that spirit, we guide that spirit to think in a way that things are going to be okay. Because, truthfully, they might be in care all their lives, so those teachings will help them, I believe, stay balanced. I believe those teachings will help them understand that they do have a purpose. Even in the 7 stages of life, we talk about that purpose, and there's a whole story behind that around how, we came here with a purpose. And one of the things I'm doing with some young boys is I'm drumming with them, and they've never had a drum before, and you can see their spirit when I drum with them. There was another little story I had not too far from here. I was to go and share some songs with this young family, and the little guys, I think they're about 6 or 7, but the little Binnoojiiyag, the little baby, was only about 2 years old, and that was a boy, and he had just started to walk. So when I got there, none of them had heard songs or anything pertaining to teachings. And so the parents, which were good parents, or good caregivers, they were the ones that suggested that, and they were non-Indigenous. They suggested that, maybe the children need culture. And so I went in, and they had never heard a drum before. They had never done smudge before. So I did a song, and as soon as that little guy, the little 2-year-old, was just beginning to walk. He was learning how to walk. But as soon as I sounded that drum, he kind of stopped in his tracks. He just stood there. And I thought he would take off again running, but he stood there and he listened to that whole song. And when I finished, he just kind of looked at me, and then he went on his merry way again. So I focused on that. I focused on that with the caregivers. I said, his spirit is pure. His spirit heard that. And that kind of gives me information about how resilient those little spirits are, because they do say that they are still close to Creator. In our Dnaagdawenmag teachings, there's little items hanging from the front of the Dnaagdawenmag, and they're hanging there to remind that little spirit that they belong here, that they are protected here, that this is a safe place. Again, those feelings of isolation really do stem from information I believe they don't have. Like, our ways of knowing are very kind. Our ways of knowing talk about belonging. They talk about, you deserve a good life. That's what those teachings talk about. I reflect back to myself again. I think things would have been totally different for me if I would have had somebody in my life sharing what I share with the youth. And again, these things were passed on to me. So it's really a sentiment of how we are as a people. Like these teachings I've just heard over and over, and I put down my tobacco. Sometimes I don't keep a lot of teachings, but when I put down my tobacco, I remember that teaching. And usually it comes from the land. When I first started my journey, I sat by the water a lot. There was an inland lake on the reserve I would go to, and my friend and I used to go there a lot as young boys, and we fished a lot. And I went up there a couple of seasons ago. I went there to do a little ceremony. I was doing some work for another organization. They asked me to do a pipe ceremony, and I thought, well, I'll go to 3 Mile Lake to do this. And I thought at the end of the bay that I said that would be a beautiful place. I don't know why I picked this place, but I did. And as I walked along the ice, it was nice and cold. The snow was crunching, and I was walking along, and that's when my friend came back to mind. He was my best friend, and he passed quite a few years ago, but he kind of came back to mind. Then I could feel the emotions, I could feel the water. I could feel the water starting to run. And I was walking on the water. But that's the water spirit, and maybe there was things there that I never did for my friend. But as I walked down there, it reminded me of how I would go to that lake early in sobriety, and I'd ask for that help. And I don't believe I mourned those losses as much as I did when I went to that water. And I couldn't help it. The water started to flow, like the tears started to flow. I could not help it. But I know today that's the water spirit. The water spirit will help us. So, when I'm working with individuals, I'll ask them, just go to the water, sit by the water, put your tobacco down, walk on Mother Earth. In my teachings, that's our first mother. So when we don't walk on the land, we don't sit on the land, we don't do things on the land, she misses us. She misses us. She'll always be there for us and give us everything we need, but we have to do our part. It goes back again to those roles and responsibility. The animals can't speak for themselves. We have to speak up for them. Because in the beginning of creation, when we first came here, they talked about how those animals came together and decided that they would help us. But us as individuals, because of colonization, a lot of us think we're at the top of the totem pole, but we're not. We're at the very bottom. And creation and the animals came first. So those animals, when they came together like that, they said they would give their lives to help us. That was their teachings. So when the moose, when the moose and the deer, there was hunting season up in my area. My daughter hunts, and they have a really good camp north of us, and they bring the youth on the land, and they show them how to hunt. But, I've seen other hunters, they have these GPSs, they have all these fancy things to track the game they're after. But it's not like that at all. If the deer and the moose want to give themselves up so that we can survive here, they will do that. They will show themselves, and they will give their lives to us so that we can have a good life. And that's why we use all the parts of either the deer or the moose. We use the hide, we use the antlers, we use the ligaments for bows. There's so many parts we use of that moose or that deer to help us survive here. So when I was talking about that in the beginning, that's why we honor those things on a daily basis. We put down the tobacco and thank those animals. I'm a drum maker, and I was taught how to make drums many years ago. And a friend of mine, he's passed on now, and he taught me how to make these drums, and another friend taught me how to make the hoops. And so when I'm sitting with the youth, I give that teaching about the hide. When we sound that drum, I say the deer stops and it hears that drum, because they don't think about it, but maybe that was a mother, maybe that was a father, maybe that was a son or a daughter that gave their lives to us. So when I ask the youth to think about that, I believe that brings respect. I believe that brings humility to them. I believe it brings those grandfather teachings to them so that they understand what life is about. So when I say that we sound that drum, that deer could come from the east, it comes from the south, the west, or the north. It could be sitting in any one of those directions. And when we sound that drum, it stops. And you can see them. They're listening. That spirit is listening. So the more we do that, I believe we are creating an indigenous worldview with them, a worldview that is theirs, a worldview that will help them see things from that perspective. In my studies, earlier in my studies, one of the first authors I had read was Vine Delorier. And he talked about that. He talked about how back in the day, our children, they were so embedded in the culture that they knew nothing else. All they talked about was indigenous ways of knowing. So when those babies sat in the cradle and they were carried around by their mother, they seen everything in creation. They were taking blueberry picking, they were taking fishing, they were taking moose cleaning moose or whatever. Those children were already starting to see what life was about. So when they started to walk, they put their feet on the ground, and that's why they have that little hole in the moccasins with the children, is that so they feel that they have that connection to Mother Earth. That helps that spirit feel that they belong. Because I was mentioning earlier, some of those little items on there hanging there are for them to help them understand that they belong here. Because life in the spirit world, sitting by Creator, was very safe. And that's the safest we'll ever feel. So when they come here, that's our role. That's our responsibility to help them feel safe. So if they're nurtured like that, they will grow up with a worldview that will help them on this path. So by the time they got to maybe 3 or 4, when they could talk and voice their own opinion, they would say, when I grow up, I'm going to be a medicine man. Or when I grow up, I'm going to be a medicine woman. Because what they were seeing was they were seeing how people helped each other. And usually those medicine women, medicine men were all about helping. That was their role. But of course, everybody couldn't be a medicine man or a medicine woman. But the more we encouraged the clan system, they understood their role and responsibility. They understood how they could still contribute to the community. So again, it goes back to those teachings about how this way of life is embedded in us. We were molded with that. We were molded with that life to help us walk on this path, walk on this red road. So I think for now, that's all I have to share around that topic, and I'm hoping I gave you what I know, what was passed on to me, And the more we share this, the more we are encouraging our people, not only our people, we're people in general. Again, I go back to Jim Dumont, and he talks about those 4 directions, those 4 races of man: black, white, yellow, red. He talked about if we could go back as far as we could, like us, we go back to time immemorial with our teachings. If everyone could see life in that way, life on earth here, I believe, would be a little better, because everybody would be following their original teachings. And that's what we're trying to do. We're really trying to do that. And, I believe it's not lost. I mean, sometimes when we think about some of the things that are happening in our organizations, the impact and how things have been made really difficult here for us. But our spirit is strong. There's nothing wrong with us. It's just what's happened to us. And that quote, I keep forgetting that quote. He's a doctor up north, Dr. Mushquash, I believe. But when he said that, he said, there's nothing wrong with us. It's just what happened to us. And when you say that to an individual, if that was said to me, at that young age, I believe that would have helped. But these are all things that are passed on. That's what we do. We pass on these teachings to help each other. So, miigwech.